Hey friends, thanks for joining me again on the Ant Panda channel. My name is Ant Panda, and we got kind of something different than traditional videos that I've been doing on the channel. Mainly just because it's kind of a new year, it's kind of a new take, and it's also something that I've kind of personally wanted to do with the new content that's coming up. What is that exactly? Well, we're going to dive into cooking, but it's going to be gaming related. And I was fortunate enough to be gifted this during Christmas from my lovely wife of the D cookbook. And this is more than just a cookbook, as it's got a lot of different tales, a lot of different lore, and a lot of different recipes that I personally am going to start cooking on I'm going to try to do it on a weekly basis. It's tough being a full-time dad, full-time husband, full-time job, and, doing this whenever I have time to do it. But so far, so good. It's been really good with the first recipe. But let's take a look and deep dive into this DI book, and we can explain the lay of the land, and then we'll talk about the first recipe that I cooked in 6 parts for you to enjoy, and that is the toasted pilaf of Old Tristram. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is the official cookbook. Surprisingly enough, I got to catch a glimpse of this before it was released late last year, actually at BlizzCon in the Herondrick Library section, which was really fun to actually see when I was down there in BlizzCon. And this has a bunch of recipes and tales from the Sanctuary, and we're going to dive in and take a look at this real quick. Again, this is an awesome book that talks about the lore and everything related to the Sanctuary, Old Tristram, New Tristram, and all the different inns that are actually in the game itself. So as you can see here, it kind of explains, I won't go into too much detail, but it does show different recipe skill levels from apprentice to master. Journeyman and artisan is the 2 mid. And the nice thing too is they also have an ingredients guide that actually tells you even more about everything related to these recipes. The first recipe of this week that we're going to talk about, as there's many to choose from, comes from the Slaughtered Calf Inn that is in New Tristram. In this one, in and of itself, we're going to be starting with the Old Tristram toasted pilaf. And this is kind of what it looks like. And believe it or not, it is quite tasty, and it does look very, very delicious once it's all finished. And it's actually very similar to this. Obviously, I'm kind of not really a chef, but this book actually helps a lot when it talks about Old Tristram, and especially in this case, the toasted pilaf. And it has 6 parts here. It has the ingredients. Of course, it's got the enemies of the area related to the game. But yeah, let's move on to the recipes. And before that, let's talk about the lore of the Old Tristram pilaf. Now, the recipe, the Old Tristram pilaf, turns out in the book itself indicates that this is a passed down tradition, a passed down recipe that came from the origins and came from the beginning of this fantastic series in Old Tristram, specifically in the area of the Rising Sun Inn. As it reads and states, as my mother used to say, flavor and scent can extricate a trove of memory. Authorists trace the origin of this pilaf recipe back to Old Tristram prior to King Leoric's descent into madness and the Darkening of Tristram, which the Darkening of Tristram is also an event in the 3rd of the series that's actually going on, I believe, as of now. So if you get a chance, take a look at it. But it continues to indicate that the old town was a lively place then, when nobody knew what festered in the catacombs beneath Leoric's chosen seat of power. I find this simple barley-based recipe a mood-lifting preamble to any meal, one that reminds me of the promise this land once held and the ghosts that dine at its table. And of course, as you can see here in the video introduction of the inns that we're getting these recipes from, this particular recipe is being served in the Slaughtered Calf Inn that is spruced up from the New Tristram town that is actually brought up in the outskirts of Old Tristram and Sanctuary. This was, of course, a town that was brought up by all the riches and plundering of the old Tristram ways, from the catacombs and the darkening of Tristram as it burns here. And as it kind of surmises, this particular recipe comes from the place of old of the Tavern of the Rising Sun, that we could kind of indicate comes from that particular tavern, and most likely was a recipe that was created from Ogden, who once ruled the old tavern, which is now laying the waste in bones and in the death and the land of Old Tristram. So here are the ingredients to the Old Tristram toasted pilaf that we're going to be making today with a ripe pear. We've got some shallots, but in this case it's just going to be yellow onion just to replace it because I couldn't find any shallots. We've got some vegetable broth, we've got some chopped walnuts, sesame oil, and of course the main ingredient, which is a pearl barley, because this is a main barley dish from Old Tristram into the Slaughtered Calf Inn. We have coriander, white pepper, and we also have 5 spice to add to the mix, as well as salt and butter that we're going to be cooking together to make this old traditional Old Tristram dish that was served above the catacombs of Diablo in the game and lore. So let's go ahead into the next steps and we'll start cooking the rest of these together. All right, the first step to cooking the Old Tristram pilaf is going to be, we need to actually take 2 tablespoons of sesame oil on a medium skillet, which is what I'm getting here. Poorly, as it's not opening. That's strange. It's going to be 2 tablespoons. Two tablespoons. And then once you take that, you're going to cook it over your medium heat for a little bit. Make sure that it actually coats the whole thing. And then you're going to take your shallots, or in this case is going to be the yellow onions, and we're going to throw it in there and cook it on medium heat for 5 minutes until it looks like this. Next step then is to take a cup of pearl barley, which we're going to measure out here to a cup, into 1 cup like this. Then gonna throw it in there for another 5 minutes until the barley is actually toasted. So it should kind of start to look like this. And then we'll stir it in for another 5 minutes with the shallots or the onions until it looks like this. And one thing to keep in mind too, constantly stirring, and you may want to add a little bit more sesame oil as you can see the shallots or kind of some of the onions here are getting a little cooked. The next step is then putting in a teaspoon of coriander, a 1/4 of a teaspoon of the 5 spice, and then a 1/2 teaspoon of the ground white pepper into it. Once you do that, you're going to stir this in for a minute, just so that it gets nice and fragrant in there. Like so. And once you got that done, you're then going to put in 2.5 cups of vegetable broth. We're going to use the same thing because all the same ingredients was in here in the Purex kind of measuring cup here. So there's 2. And then we're going to put a 1/2 cup. Don't mind my basset hounds. We're then going to stir this up so that we bring it to a boil and let it set for about 40 minutes till it looks like this. Now that it's brought to a boil, we're going to go ahead and lower the heat all the way down to low, and we are going to cover it and let it simmer for about 40 minutes. Once 40 minutes is up, go ahead and uncover and give this a stir. I want to look at this closer. It went from like a soup to the actual look of the barley, which looks really cool. Next piece and the next step is to throw in the diced pears, and that's the timer that's going off. And you're gonna stir this in and do the same thing. We're gonna let this simmer for another 10 minutes. It's gonna make these pears nice and softened as part of it. And then yeah, once that's stirred in, you're gonna cover this again, and we're gonna cover this again, and then we're gonna wait 10 minutes, and then we'll do the final step. And now the final step, after it simmers and softens up the pears that you can see here with the rest of the pilaf, as you take the walnuts and the salt and the butter and stir it in, get all that extra, and throw it in there to serve. Once you stir that in, make it all melted, and you should be ready to go. Here's a close-up what it looks like. It actually looks really good. In the middle of it, it kind of looked a little concerning, like almost like I did something wrong, because it kind of looked like a soup, and it's not supposed to look like a soup or be a soup, which is why that simmering for 40 minutes is pretty important with this. But yeah, once you got it there, that's what this looks like, and you're ready to serve. Now, the Old Tristram toasted pilaf is to serve. And now the taste of it. It's actually quite good. I was a little shocked and surprised, and also a little weird about onions, or I think in this case it was shallots, but the shallots or this yellow onion in the case of us replacing it actually tastes really good with it. It's very savory. And what's nice is the pear, and again, I'm not an expert by any means when it comes to cooking, the pear kind of offsets a little bit of the savoriness, but the barley and everything is just tasty. And then the walnuts add a nice texture to it. This is really good. This didn't take very long either. This took about an hour altogether, because when you think about it, it's like 10 minutes for the shallots and the onions, and then you put in the vegetable broth, and then you put the barley in. That's another 5 minutes. But then once the vegetable broth is in there, and then you let it simmer for about 40 minutes. That kind of gets close to an hour, a little over. But after that, it's just then letting it set for about 10 minutes with the rest of the ingredients. And those spices just add really good and kind of lift it up. So definitely highly recommend this. This is a really simple, nice dish with a lot of extra ingredients you wouldn't normally get, I would think, but I could see why they would make this come from Old Tristram into the Slaughtered Calf Inn, so definitely recommend. All right, well, that is the toasted pilaf from the Slaughtered Calf Inn from Old Tristram. This is Ant Panda. I'm going to work on some of the next ingredients in the coming week, so stay tuned for that, and I'll catch you in the next one.